Revolt. This video of revolt was what? Was the revolting conditions of their shadow government, but they're so powerful, so many years, they just operate now publicly and say, that's it, we have control, what can you do about it? That's a revolting against the laws of God and man, the Constitution, Bill of Rights. So we, the American people, are forced to revolt against such a revolting condition. The system has rotted and it's corrupt. Now, this being God's Day, Dominico's Sunday, I come to you as Preacher Doc. And I will explain again, chronologically, universal pure Christians. I've always been a religious man. Thought of being a priest. No, I prefer to be married and have a family, a wife and a family. And that's so after I completed through the years obtaining the highest step level in the discipline of science, I was, of course, forced, robbed, brutally, plagiarized, framed, bankrupted. And I said, what is man's greatest challenge? The discipline of theology. How did we get here? Why are we here? What best to do? And I answer that. I have videos. Well, why don't I have my God's Day Sunday service? Not in the U.S.A. This U.S.A. has rotted. The system is governed by the gun since Eisenhower. Eisenhower, I think, to placate his his conscience, said that the U.S. people main concern is that the shadow government doesn't really take over and continue their government, and that's what has occurred. That is a revolting condition against the laws of God, humanity, because they practice genocide, murderous injuries against their competition. A great loyal American is that's the one they fear the most, because they would take and become the authority and run the country with honest people, a real democracy, not a King George. They said, well, we're connected with royalty, so we should govern King George, Queen Hoover. Hypocrisy. You understand? So what are especially I and others forced to overcome and try to ignore, or at least try to ignore? And that is the Hoovers that run around. And they say, yeah, we're Hoovers, but look, we get paid. I don't care what we call or what we do, as long as they pay me, yeah. Well, I've told you the story that I was the original 007, and anything they said I was or wanted me to do or I could do, yeah, that's what I was, as long as I lived that day and the next day, that week, that month, that year, that decade. Until now, I'm 89 plus, and I'll be 90. Do you understand? That was the condition I was in. Anything they frame me in, I wanted to be in there. Oh, yeah, sure, yeah, But the big difference between that, survival, And those who sell themselves for 30 pieces of silver, they sell themselves. So you can call them anything you want. They will say and do anything as long as you pay them. That's what and they say, yeah, but look at I'm doing something to you. You have to try to keep me from doing something to you, and they pay me. Well, I, of course, ignore them, avoid them, try to ignore them. And as expose editor, I have 4 programs. Number 1 is Preacher Doc. Number 2 is Doc C PhD Company in the discipline of science, what I have achieved, absolute true facts. The third is Expose Editor, in which I look at all the facts and analyze them and accumulate them and present them from my opinion. And of course, I have to say copyrighted because I need financial reimbursement for what I achieved. So this is copyrighted July 25th, Simi Valley, California, 93063, all rights reserved. And as expose editor, I tell it as it is. You can be sure as expose editor. You see, as a preacher, I will not lie. And I try, of course, not. I don't lie in whatever I do. And then there's that of the cultural and literature, prose poetry. It's the greatest challenge in literature. And I've said I've written 3 poems that I can't find it right now, but I know there's someplace. And one of them, I think, is the greatest poem I've ever read anytime, anywhere. And I remember the title. It's If I Could Only Write One Poem. And in writing that, I actually write the one poem that, in my opinion, is the poem at least is good, and I like to think it's more of poetry because the other one of trees is so great that they made a song. So as 007, I would try to present whatever, and even include a little entertainment. I like to try to croon a tune. I used to try to imitate Bing Crosby. And then, now there's Ezio Pinza, got a great voice in that South Pacific. Some enchanted evening. He starts off real strong. Some enchanted evening, you will see a stranger. And I had the lyrics kind of memorized, and the first time I tried making a video, I hit every note. That surprised me. Best I've ever done then and since. It's on the YouTube someplace. If they haven't confiscated and wiped it off, which is what they usually do, buy a company or something, they change something, use tricks. So this is Preacher Doc, and I should say then from the discipline of theology, how universal Christians came to be. And that is, I conferred when I was in Argentina of becoming a priest. And the bishop there, who is now the Pope, said, well, it would be okay by him. He'd give it some real thought, but he says Rome decides. Well, now he is in Rome, but that their system is that he will not change, they will not let him change, or he will not change, or they will not let him change. So I said, well, look at it from the true facts. St. Peter was married, and Christ said he would build his church on, his name was Simon. He said, I now call you Petro, rock. I will build my church on this rock. And there's the St. Peter's in Rome. He says, you got to get the answer from Rome. Where you live, your cathedral, your first, the Bishop of Rome, your first Pope is married, St. Peter. Then there's others that made the Christian church. Some did more than St. Peter, actually, as far as going out and preaching. None of them went to a seminary school or a college. Some of them might have been, one of them, I think, was a physician. One of the disciples who became an apostle. Most of them were fishermen. You see. So, who can tell me I can't be a preacher? Informing anywhere in the universe, based mainly on the Catholic religion, then on Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, some of their real good principles, Reformation by Martin Luther, who decided to marry a nun, if I remember correctly, and all the others, Baptists, all the religions, all have a leader. Some say they did miracles. Other countries, other ways, they have certain, and then they have codes, and some of them live daily by the religious code. That's the way they live daily. Oh, that's all good. They cannot say everyone must be of that, though. Or if they're not good, and they can do something to them. I say everybody is welcome, but you must be a moral person. Christ said you must be a moral person. In fact, Christ says, when you are young, you're a young man. But then as you get older and you become a real man, you take a wife and have a wife and a family. I'm quite sure that's what Christ said. So this is kind of like my sermon. That I have universal pure Christians, not that we are pure, or we are purer than anyone else. We have the clearest, the purest comprehension, explanation with proofs, and presentation of Christ when he came to earth and what he preached and what he proved. You see, in science you prove what you present, and I prove what I present by his miracle proofs, at least 40. So, what now, as preacher, Doc, what are conditions in the USA? Well, for that, as to what I achieved as Doc C PhD company, now I speak as Doc C, the semi-retired scientist PhD company. I invented the Xerox, X-E-R-O-X, did the original work. I'm from Rochester, New York. Gave it the name, told them to start it in the empty, bankrupt Haloid building. I used to walk by, I looked in there was nothing. They had gone bankrupt, gone to back to Chicago or something. So that's where we try it. And when it took off, it was Haloid Xerox in the U.S. And I started to argue about it being my Xerox, so they dropped it as Haloid Xerox. They went to Xerox because they're in Washington, D.C. J. Edgar Hoover, they can control the patent office. And the original one I did precisely as it came out, in color, the original one. And they let me work in Xerox. And that is what a story. Wow. Tremendous. Can you imagine that? The inventor. They let me work in Xerox as in a sort of an engineering construction employee because they wanted to go from black and white to color. And I improve, and I have proved, and I can take my license out now and show you. It says 007. And then I says, I got to discuss it with him. I'm a real man. I have two. 009. So then, as expose editor, I tell it like it is. So now, as expose editor, this U.S.A, they run around as Hoovers. They're paying me. And look at me, I run around hitting you, and they pay me. That's what I want. I hit others. So what can religious people do? Well, they pray in their churches and so forth. But they must realize the facts. I think they have to take part in revolting. They revolt against the revolting situation of the Hooverists that have control. Because then that's the way that your children grow up in this atmosphere of immorality. Which is, they are disgusting, immoral. They actually play with themselves. They do something and play back and forth, do something, gyrations, chit-chat. They play with themselves. It's sort of that they masturbate with their nonsense, is what they're doing. And then at the top they have a circle jerk, and they say, well, we do this, and we'll say this is what it really is. And then we'll push it down, and then it goes all the way down to the street and back up again. So, and then circle jerk of heuristic masturbating from the point of theology, sinful. From the point of God and man is absolutely rotted, corrupt. We have an illegal president. Can you imagine what that fella has to do to keep, not only be in the United States, be president? They have control. If you don't do what they want, they shoot you and they move, and that's what they've done. Isn't that correct? Do I write these assassinations? Huh? I risk my life, especially for Robert Kennedy. If he would have done it my way, I says, you know, do it my way, they got to get me before they can get you. But no, they talked him into changing his itinerary, and I'm waiting at the presidential suite for him to come back, as I told him not once, twice, face to face. And he goes through the kitchen, Bobby, through a commercial kitchen. That's where they chop meat, in a kitchen. And he got chopped down, do you understand? Hoover was not going to be replaced. He had the power. So they ruled by the gun. A revolting condition of Hooverism, of King George, Queen Hoover, Hooverism, not democracy, hypocrisy, rotted, corrupt. That's telling it like it is per expose editor. And then there's the cultural. And in the cultural, you have, well, there's the literature and your writings and prose and poetry. And I was told poetry is the most challenge in a discipline of literature. Well, they told me that because of my speaking voice and the way I speak, because I grew up in a tough neighborhood, and we all spoke, and the whole city spoke this way. Nobody thought we had an accent, but when I taped my voice in science and played it back, I was surprised. I could hear that New York accent, which I don't particularly like. But this is my speaking voice. So well, no, you're English. So well, let's see what I can do as far as literature. And I've written some real good poems, real good poems. And I've written 2 mini books. One of them is Correcting Einstein. Absolutely. From A to Z. And the other one I have Correcting Einstein with the quote marks. Now they say you have literary license. So if you put one little mark, that gives you the literary license to use that word or phrase to have a certain significance. And I do that and I say correcting the Bible. I'm not really correcting the Bible. I'm putting forward, like I said, that man should get married and priests must be married in order to fulfill, to have children and continue the priesthood. They're having all kinds of problems and not having enough priests. Well, you don't marry, you don't have children. You say the other people don't interfere, they got to have children, they got to have children. Well, why don't you marry and have children? Christ said, when you get to be a real man, you marry and have a wife and a family and children. Isn't that correct? So now who should maybe look up to who in the discipline of theology? And then there's the true fact of when I was preacher doc, they'd say, well, they talk about visions and what is it, the visions of the children of Medjugorje. It's real. They're on TV. You can get them on TV still. You can attend their sessions where they see the Blessed Virgin Mary and talk to her. And they've had all kind of scientists and all these, you got to test and all that. They actually say it appears they really see the Blessed Virgin Mary. Who am I or anybody to say that they're not? It's very special, all the dust they've thrown at them. So I used to say no, but then I thought about it. So I say, well, it's 50.01. I think I saw a vision, and 49.99 that I was dreaming. But I'm telling you, that vision was real. I kept checking myself to see if I was awake, and I was awake, and I kept checking the room and behind of it. I could not see through that vision. It was white, but it was, even though it was white, it was opaque. That was a real substance. So I started to get up to touch it, and it disappeared. you see. So I say I'm Preacher Doc whether anybody likes it or not. And then we have where, this being God's day, I should say something as far as like what Christ was important. I think the most important, of course, is he says, this is my body, holding up bread. Now, what did Christ really mean? He spoke in parables. Bread is considered the staff of life. This represents humanity, okay? And if you want to obtain paradise with God and Christ, it's not easy. Hey, scientists show you how big the universe is and all that. Wow. Huh? The time it takes for the light to go from one galaxy to another and so forth. And they say, well, where is this God in the universe? Christ was here on earth, and he said to raise Lazarus, he says, I know you hear me when I speak. But the proof to all of these, who were, I guess, about 1,000, there were doctors, lawyers, politicians, soldiers, anybody of any walk of life was there to see if he would bring Lazarus back to life, who had been dead for 4 days, and they said was starting to decay. And he says, I didn't speak aloud. And he says, Lazarus, come forth. And Lazarus walked out of the tomb with his death clothes on. Now, I don't write this. It was written by the eyewitnesses. People say, oh yeah, but the book of Bible was written 500 years later by this. Come on. They'll tell you everything some Caesar or some king or soldier did. Everything, his speech and what he did and how he lived. Oh yeah. When it comes to Christ, well, yeah, maybe there was a real Christ, but it just, God, the real eyewitnesses, real, true, historical fact. So what was most important and what Christ, this is my body, meaning you have a body, okay? And have this in, you have the bread, and then a little wine. He had a little wine, a cup of wine, and it's probably red wine. And he says, this is my blood. Now, did he mean it was really his blood? No, it was red wine. It was representing blood, because he would say you have to have a good heart. He would talk about your heart, meaning your heart pumps the blood in your system. That keeps you, that's your life, how you stay alive as a human being. And in paradise, I have the opinion that you obtain eternal spirit. You have eternal spirit, and that keeps you eternally alive. But he used wine and says, do this in remembrance of me. What did he mean in remembrance? In belief, of course. In belief that he said he was the Son of God, and that, as he said, when you see him, you see God, you see the divine power of God. So it is very, very tough for those who are non-believers to accept that this could be this divine power. And it's very tough for those who believe creationists, to go up against scientists who say, look at all this vast universe, it's just here. Einstein said it's just here on my one-on-one showdown conference with him. How did it get here? This inert matter doesn't create itself, so it had to be a supernatural power. This supernatural power, the power of creation. Those who believes it's creation, divine power of God. Any proof? Christ proved at least 40 divine miracle proofs. So thus, I say, as Preacher Doc, that is our faith. And I say, of course, thank you.